So the subfloor is kind of like the foundation of your Airstream. And so today we're going to discuss whether or not you should fully replace your subfloor and kind of like some of the different ways that it can be done and options with that. So stay tuned. I would say two of the most common questions that I see when it comes to Airstreams, whether it's on my channel or like all the different forums, is the first one is on electrical, and I will be doing some videos on that. I have so many questions on that. But the second one is people ask, should I attempt to replace my subfloor? Do I need to? How hard is it? All of those different things. And so I want to kind of dive into that and address some of those questions and take a look at, just the design of how the Airstream works and Subfloor works, and why I believe that it is unbelievably important that if you're doing a vintage restoration, that you take it down all the way to the frame and completely replace your subfloor. So the first thing I want to do is with this particular chassis, where we have basically the frame's been repaired and the subfloor's down on it, as well as the C-channel. So we're going to look at how it all works together and why it is really important to, not only to address your subfloor, but also to do it the right way. Because I see a lot of times that people do it, in what I would consider not the correct way. It's a little bit bright, so I may be squinting a bit. So here is basically the clearest way to see how the subfloor connects to the frame as well as the shell. So you have your frame basically, and these are your outriggers. You can kind of see it here. And these come out off of the frame. And then obviously the subfloor sits down onto the frame, and in the middle sections where the frame rails and the cross members are, there's floor screws that go in that hold it down. But then on the outside, you have some form of C-channel. On some of the newer ones, they have the C-channel that wraps completely around the floor like this one does. And that basically sandwiches the subfloor into it. And then you have bolts that go up through the outriggers that hold the whole assembly together. And then the last thing is the shell rivets on to this outer edge of the C-channel with several hundred rivets all around the exterior. And then lastly, the final structural part is that the belly wrap comes up and it attaches onto that and overlaps. So needless to say, the subfloor is kind of like it's the thing in the middle of everything that is a very important structural piece. It is integrated into every aspect of it. And so a lot of times whenever you have, say like it rots out over an outrigger, you're going to have a loose spot here. Your bolt comes loose, it'll destroy your C-channel, and then you basically have a spot where it gets really wobbly. You hear something called rear end sag on some of the rear bath Airstreams, and that's what happens in the back, where that whole rear piece of subfloor rots out, and then that allows the whole shell to essentially come down, and all of your structural support is gone back there. And a lot of times, unless you completely rip out your bath, you won't necessarily know that that's going on. Sometimes it's more dramatic than other times, where you can literally see the damage in the back, where it starts to come up and hit the shell. The frame will hit the shell, but a lot of times it's not as noticeable, but you still have major damage. So whenever you're evaluating your trailer to determine if you need to replace your subfloor, there's one big question that I would ask yourself initially, and that is going to be, what is your intent with the trailer? If it's something that you want to just occasionally camp with, that you're going to keep covered most of the year, and it's something that you may not keep for a really long term, then you may not want to necessarily go to quite as much length if the subfloor looks to truly be in really good condition. If it's something that you're going to be living in, you're going to be wanting to have this be an investment that you keep for a very long time, that you're going to be using a lot, then I would pretty much 100% of the time regardless of the condition of the floor, I would suggest you replace the subfloor. And there's two big reasons why. One, you know, this wood is depending on the age of your trailer, up to 40, 50 years old. And so it's going to be compromised in some capacity. Another thing is you just don't know what the frame looks like underneath it, because in several different situations, the subfloor, I've seen the subfloor look really great, and then the frame have a lot of damage underneath. And so you never know until you pull it up. So I always recommend, if it's something that you're wanting to invest in, that you do the foundational work to make sure that this is going to be something that lasts a long time. Because the last thing you want to do is build out a beautiful interior only to find out that the frame is about to crack in half. I'll use this specific project as an example. This was a 1986, and from the outside the thing looked absolutely spectacular. It was in really good shape, and to be honest, the floor, it had some spots, but it wasn't as bad as some other ones I've seen. It was pretty good. It had a rear bath, and so obviously there was some rot spots back there. But once we pulled the floor up, we saw just how bad the frame was, honestly. Somewhere around 75% of the outriggers had to be replaced. Right over here by the step, where there actually was not much subfloor damage, there was a hole about this big, and I'll show some pictures, in the frame where it had rusted through, where we needed to basically rebuild that whole area. And so, you don't know until you know when it comes to the frame condition. So I always highly recommend replacing the subfloor and just making sure everything's right. One of the other benefits of doing the work and replacing the floor is that you're actually going to increase the value of the trailer when it's all said and done. If you can show and have documentation and everything that you have replaced the floor, that the frame is in good condition, then it'll easily increase the value of the trailer. I can't say exactly by how much, but if I were to assume, I would say somewhere around $10,000. So it's really worth doing that work, especially if it's something that you're going to be using as an investment, whether it's an Airbnb or something that you're going to flip and sell. You really want to make sure that you're going to maximize and get the most money out of it. So let's talk about the different ways that you can do the subfloor repairs and replacements, and what I would kind of consider the correct way of doing it and then the incorrect way of doing it. Kind of the absolute best case scenario is you use some sort of, whether you use gantry cranes or lift or a forklift, and you completely lift the shell off of your frame, and you pull it out and you rip up the floor and you do the repairs and then you put it back down. That would be a full shell off subfloor replacement. Kind of the next best thing is if you do something where it's you're lifting it in place, and maybe I did the pull jack method where I jacked it up off of the frame, and the frame actually stayed underneath the shell because I didn't have any other space, and we did all the repairs underneath while it was jacked up, and it was supported by some pieces of wood. There's different ways you can do it, whether you run a 4x4 underneath and you put it on cinder blocks. I've seen that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that, and then you put it back down. And I would say, honestly, those are the two methods that I would consider the right way. Now, stuff that I have seen people do, that I have heard about, that I just don't think is a good idea, I don't agree with. One of them is kind of doing segmented replacements, and that may be where you either just replace the front section or just the rear. You're not seeing the whole picture whenever you do that. Now, yes, you can do that, but I just don't think that that's the best method. Something that I absolutely do not recommend is to essentially replace the subfloor in sections where you maybe cut the 4x8 sheet in half and you put one piece in and then you put the other piece in so it goes under the channel, because you're actually compromising the structure of the Airstream by cutting that piece in half. It's no longer as rigid, so the whole thing is a little bit shakier, essentially. Again, the other thing is you don't know the condition of your, your C channel. You can't replace the C channel if you do it that way. You can't really fix the frame very well. And so that's just not ideal. And then kind of the worst thing you could do is if you cut around, like just basically cut the floor out around the edge and then put plywood back down and basically just leave that strip around the edge holding the whole thing together with new plywood down. Because here's what can happen is you have that thinner piece of loose plywood essentially over here that's holding the whole trailer together. And if that rots out, which it probably is somewhat already rotted out, that could literally cause the thing to come off of the frame and cause, obviously, immense damage to the shell, to if you're driving and something were to happen. So I absolutely do not recommend doing that method. I have seen that, and I just, I think it's people just don't really know how it works. And so I just want to, come out here and educate people on the kind of the right way to do it, and not in. So I just really want to, do this to educate people the right and the safest way to do this, where your trailer is still structurally sound. Because it's kind of like in a house, you wouldn't just cut out a big slab of the foundation in the middle of the house and pull it out and replace it if you have damage. Like, you'd have to completely repair the whole foundation. I mean, obviously that's a little bit different how those work, but you get the idea. So if you are, looking to buy a trailer, or you already have your trailer, I hope that this kind of gave you some information. I want to do one last thing, and if you are looking to buy a trailer, you obviously need to evaluate what you're going to buy with what you're willing to take on as far as a project. And so, I would say if there's any sort of softness or damage in the floor, you pretty much assume that you're going to have to do a full shell off repair. Like I said, I always suggest doing that if there's any compromise to the subfloor. I disagree with patching. I disagree with, any of those other methods, just because, ultimately you could have a much bigger problem underneath the trailer that could lead to further issues down the road. And the last thing you want to do is take all that time to build out a beautiful interior only to have it destroyed by a frame problem. So I appreciate all the support. If you haven't already, I would love it if you'd subscribe to our channel, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you have any questions, or you are interested in having us do some work on your trailer, whether it's a subfloor replacement. I do have a lot of people who, they want to do the interior build out, but they're just not confident to do the subfloor replacement. And so we take on those. That's, exactly what this project here is. And so we are taking on clients for that. So give us a shout. Our email and contact info is below, and we will see you next time.